returned to India armed with degrees in surgery and biomedical science. He was entrusted the Fedling Sri.
My subject is Ayurveda and medicine you might have seen, but medicine in the sense of medical science. So for a few preliminary observations. One, I will not be talking about the actual practice of medicine, treating illness, operating. That is also a very large part of medicine. But I'll be making a reference to medical science. That is the meaning of medicine in my title given to you. And the second, I'll be talking more about Ayurveda than modern medicine because our countrymen and countrywomen, they know more about modern science than about Ayurveda. Even though it has been with us for thousands of years, there is very little authentic knowledge about Ayurveda. This is certainly true about my own medical fraternity. They know very little about Ayurveda. So there is a need for me to spend a little more time. In fact, most of my time will be spent on that. And also references to modern science, which I'll be making. And the third preliminary observation is the use of the tapestry. Because when you talk about these two disciplines, Ayurveda and modern science, there are a certain togetherness in this country. These are the two main streams of medicine in India. I don't believe they will come together in the sense Ganga and Yamuna joining a Sangam. The water, you cannot distinguish it is whether it belongs to Ganga or Yamuna. I don't believe that kind of a fusion is going to take place here. Here they come together in the sense of a tapestry. The yarns are separate, the vertical and the horizontal. But that horizontal is always changing, the designs, the colors and all that. So when you look at it, it is very difficult to know that there are different yarns here. They look one unified whole, a brilliant, wonderful picture. But each retains its own individuality. So it is that kind of a union that will take place, in my view, Ayurveda and modern medicine or modern medical science. They will retain their individuality. For example, Panchakarma, that is a specific therapeutic procedure in Ayurveda, the concepts behind it, they will all remain intact, but they may be used in practice. So therefore, it is used in a way they come together. In the years to come, people will be unable to distinguish. Just looking at a tapestry, how many of us will distinguish the yarns, the way they are woven together? It is impossible to do it, except for a specialist. So here also that kind of a union will take place, in my view. So that explains the preliminary, so that my talk makes sense. Now when you talk of Ayurveda, we must remember, like many other disciplines in India, the origin is in the Vedas. Vedas were not only spiritual documents. They were of course a source of spiritual knowledge, but there is a great deal else in Vedas. In fact, everything like music, you trace it to Gandharva Veda. Martial arts, you trace it to Veda. And medicine, you trace it to Atharva Veda. That is the source. In fact, Charaka, which is the foundational text of Ayurveda, he says specifically, those who wish to learn Ayurveda, they must be reverential to Atharva Veda, because that is the source. And this has 6,000 verses and 1,000 prose lines. And the Bloomfield, who was a professor of Sanskrit in Johns Hopkins more than 100 years ago, he took a special interest in Atharva Veda. And he collected out of this huge 6,000 verses a small number which he found most interesting and important according to him. And there, if you look at Bloomfield's collection, you will find it is contains a whole lot of mundane matters relating to spiritual, philosophical. That will maybe 10%. But there is a whole lot dealing with life, like long life, prayers for long life, for good health, for fertility, fertility of the soil, for a good harvest. Number of things like that, mundane things, concerned with day-to-day life. And it is almost like you might say it is the people's Veda. So that is one of the unusual things about Atharva Veda. And diseases and treatment. Number of diseases are mentioned. And all these diseases were regarded in those days as punishments decreed by gods, who were angered by the transgressions of man. So if the Agni, frequently heard term, if he was angered by something that human beings had done, then the punishment would be fever. If Varuna, another god frequently mentioned, god of the waters, if he was angered, the punishment would be dropsy, like this. So that is how it was viewed in those days. And the treatment naturally would involve, apart from giving some medicinal plants, etc., there would be a hymn to please that particular god. So hymns were an integral part of treatment. But there are very good sections on anatomy. There is a long section which talks about the human body, the wonderful structure of man. That is the title of that sutta. Each one, all the organs are listed, not in the form of a list. There is a poetical way. Who created this wonderful hands of the man which does heroic deeds? Who created this tongue? Who created the breath which goes in and comes out? Like that, there is who did this, who did this. An element of mystery, some poetry. That is how the whole list, all the organs are listed. Obviously they knew, like liver or spleen, these are all mentioned there. Similarly, medicinal plants, a large number of plants are listed. And they also were treated with reverence. There is always a prayer to the plant itself. Like a plant, there is a very interesting verse which is very famous also. They have observed that animals, when they are sick, pigs for example, they don't normally eat plants. But when they are sick, they will go and nibble certain plants. Even dogs do that. And they have observed this. And there it says, the prayer is addressed to that plant. Oh, holy ones, you who heal these animals coming to you, may you heal us, like this. So they have observed this, but there is a certain element of godliness attached even to medicinal plants. That is another feature of this. All this, what it comes to is, the practice of medicine in Atharva Veda, essentially it is a faith-based medicine. Faith. Charaka calls it in his term, it is Deva Vyapashraya. It is faith-based medicine. That was the feature. I want to give a concrete example. What exactly does it mean? A specific example, jaundice. Jaundice is a common disease, that you all know. And it was common in those days also. So if there is a patient with jaundice, in the Atharva Vedic times, which is 1500 before the current era, according to Indian authorities, maybe it is even earlier, but anyway, around that time, so many centuries ago, if at that time a man with jaundice was brought to a bishak. Bishak was the name for a vaidya, for a doctor. Now there is a sutta, there is a very good description how this patient would be treated. Now first of all, that man, they would have an amulet tried with a medicinal plant around his wrist, probably with a chant. And then he is given a drink of turmeric and milk. And after this, there is a pudding made of the same turmeric and milk. It is pasted all over his body from head to foot. Then it is washed away. And he is made to lie on a charpoy type of thing. This is an artist creation. I asked my artist, describe to him. He drew it for me. And then this, you must also notice, towards the foot of the patient, there is a cow there. There is a cow there, a reddish brown color. And also there are 3 birds here, which are yellow in color. Now then this bishak would chant a particular hymn. And that hymn goes as follows. This is the hymn. Up to the sun shall go thy heartache and thy jaundice. In the color of the red bull do we envelop thee. We envelop thee in red tins unto long life. May this person go unscathed and free of yellow color. The cows whose divinity is Rohini, they who moreover are themselves red, in their every form and every strength do we envelop thee. Into the parrots, these are the birds, into the ropanakas, probably thrush, do we put thy jaundice, and furthermore, into the haridravas, that's the third bird, do we put thy jaundice. Now this ritual, and the patient has to repeat this after the bishak. And this was a symbolic ritual. And what it tries to do is, as is chanting, the belief at that time was the yellow color from the patient is being taken away and put into the yellow birds, because that's where it belongs. And the reddish-brown color of the cow is being taken and put into the patient. It was believed at that time this kind of transfer was feasible according to this ritual. Now this was done along with the turmeric preparation which he was taking. Essentially, this ritual is very detailed description. There is a Kaushika Sutra which is part of Atharva Veda which gives all these rituals. If you only read the hymn, that doesn't make much sense. Nobody will understand what it is. But if you take this ritual also, then you understand along with this is what was being done at that time. Now contrast this with Charaka, who came in 1st century of the current era. Now there, by that time, jaundice was known as Kamala in Ayurveda. The disease was well known, described. It regarded as a manifestation of the accumulation of disturbed pitta in the gut and the blood. Early stages and terminal stage of the disease described. The cause is attributed to eating inappropriate and harmful food items. A variety of jaundice with clay-colored stools, which was noted at that time, which we know today, what we call obstructive jaundice, because the bile from the liver, it doesn't get into the intestine. There is a block there, maybe due to cancer. So his jaundice, there is the color of the stool is clay color. That's a very important diagnostic thing even today. So Charaka has described that. And treatment by dietary regime, panchakarma, and a variety of medicinal formulations. There is no ritual, there is no mantra. So this is a very singular, very, very important change. The same Charaka who says you must be reverential to Atharva Veda, in his own prescription for treatment for jaundice, you will find no trace from Atharva Veda here. So the medicine according to him had become Yukti Vyapasraya. It is reason-based medicine. That was the change which took place. This is profound change. How did this come about? Now that is 1,000 years of Buddhism in India. Often we don't pay much attention to this when we look at the history of medicine in India. And Hyun-Sang, who came here in the 6th century, he had already seen by that time Buddhism was on the decline. He writes in several places, the place of neglect of Buddhist stupas and so on. Now these mantras and rituals of Atharva Veda disappeared during this time because the Buddhists never accepted the authority of the Vedas. But the basic doctrines of Ayurveda, the Buddhist texts that we have, like the questions of King Milinda, for example, Milinda Pandho, or Vishuddhimagga of Ashokosha. So many of these great Buddhist texts, or Vinaya Pitaka, everywhere they are essentially Buddhist spiritual texts. But there are a number of references to medicine, incidental references. They give you an idea of what kind of medicine was practiced. It doesn't go into details about anatomy or physiology. Unfortunately, we have no texts of medicine practiced in the Buddhist era. They did exist because Charaka himself, Charaka Samhita, which he wrote in the 1st century, he writes at the end of every chapter, Agnivesha Tantra Puna Samskrite. This is a redaction of Agnivesha Tantra. That was an earlier text which existed for hundreds of years. That Agnivesha Tantra was the major text in the Buddhist time. We don't have it today. But we know it existed. It's not mythical because Charaka Samhita's most important commentary, without which we cannot really understand Charaka Samhita. It's a difficult text. Now that was written by Chakrapani Datta, who was a Bengali, who lived in the 10th century. Now, when he wrote his commentary, he quotes from Agnivesh Tantra. He says, this is from Agnivesh Tantra. So he had it available to him. Unfortunately, we don't have it today. That we have lost. So there was a Buddhist text. There we would know exactly what was the practice of medicine, which we unfortunately don't have. We are therefore forced to depend on these fragmentary, incidental references to medicine in the spiritual texts. But even there, we get a good idea. For example, Panchabhuta, Tridosha, human anatomy, the herbal drugs we use, medicinal procedures such as Basti and Vamana, concepts of hygiene, classification of foods, physician, patient, attendant, triad. These are all central concepts in Ayurveda. All these are mentioned in these spiritual texts of Buddhism. So therefore, Ayurveda, the term they never used, because Buddhists would never use the word Veda in anything. It was called Chikitsa. That was the term they would use. But there is no doubt, but Buddhist medicine, if I could use that term, that was the forerunner of Ayurveda. In fact, the leaders of Ayurveda, the great teachers, they were all Buddhists. Vagbhata, one of the Brihatrayi, there are Brihatrayi, the great three of Ayurveda, Charaka, Sushruta and Vagbhata. And Vagbhata, Charaka lived in the Punjab, Kashmir area. Sushruta is associated with Banaras. And Vagbhata was from Sindh. And he was a Buddhist. He himself was self-confessed Buddhist. So they were the great leaders. Now this is again to give you an idea about the importance of Ayurveda in Buddhist times. In Buddha's life there is a very famous incident. In that picture you will see the my pointer is not very good. So I think you can see it very well. Buddha is in the center, sitting on that platform. And on the left you find a person in royal robes, that is Bimbisara, who was the king, who was a disciple of Buddha. And on the right hand center you see a person, a bearded person, that is Jivaka. He was Buddha's physician. He was also the physician of Bimbisara, one of the great surgeons who had done the trephining of the skull, which Sushruta had not described. But he had done that. There are so many stories about him. He was a student of Takshashila in Banaras, in Taxila, which is in Pakistan, and how a brilliant student he was, his legendary surgical skill. He would charge big fees and donate all that to the Buddhist Sangha. Wonderful stories about him. Now that is Jivaka sitting there. So this Jivaka's practice of surgery in those days, that again gives you another dimension of the practice of medicine in Buddhist times. Now Ayurveda, the traditional medicine practiced in Buddhist period, was the forerunner, and health and recovery from ill health. The practice of medicine at that time, the core of it is health or swastha vritta. That is the most important, how to remain healthy. That is the most important. And secondly, if you are unlucky and you become sick, how to get out of it. That's the thing. These are the twin themes of Ayurveda, central. But that is not the only thing in Ayurveda. Medicine, preventive and promotive, that, and curative. These are the central themes. But that's not the only thing in Ayurveda. There is a whole lot else, a background which is very rich in number of doctrines and so on. Now that is what makes Ayurveda holistic medicine. Now holistic, nowadays people think it is a mixture of Ayurveda and modern medicine, homeopathy, naturopathy. That is now believed to be holistic. That has nothing to do with holistic. Holistic is this: treatment, health, maintenance, and recovery from illness. That is the central theme, relief of suffering. That remains. But there is so much else, as I will be talking about. That background is what enriches the central theme. That's what makes it holistic. Now, to give you an analogy, here is a great painting, all of you are familiar with this, The Last Supper. Now here that central figure is Christ. You can see him sitting there, silhouetted against a large window. But if you look at this painting, it is an immortal painting, as all of you recognize. But the disciple sitting there, that table, all the lines, the vertical lines, the horizontal lines, the ceiling, all the windows. If you look at that, you begin to think that all these are somehow converging on to that central figure. If you take all those away, Christ alone is sitting there. It is still a painting, but it will not be the Last Supper. So this becomes so important by conscious design. Leonardo could do this, create this magic effect. All those, the background, apart from Christ, they are all somehow linked to him, part of it. That is what makes it great. Ayurveda is something like that. That central figure is the health, and if you are sick, how to get well. That's the central theme, relief of suffering. That's the fundamental thing about any form of life. There is no form of life without suffering. Even the amoeba suffers. But how to relieve that suffering? How to minister, not to be ministered unto, as Christ would say. Now that is the central theme. But there is a whole lot else, which is what makes it holistic. Now this background is something which is unique in Ayurveda, so I would like to mention a few of them. Now here there are doctrines, ideas, vision. Some of these I should like to, because ordinarily in a talk about the practice of medicine, there is no need to bring any of this. Here Panchabhuta. Panchabhuta are not the elements of the periodic table. They had ether, air, fire, water, and earth. This said in all civilizations they had similar concepts that constitute the universe, which are accessible to our senses. Ayurveda clearly says we only deal with what is accessible to our senses. In other words, the physical universe. What is suprasensory is not the business of Ayurveda. They clearly say that. Supernatural, they don't get into it. What is accessible to the senses. Now those, the five elements, which are the macrocosm, but the human body is a microcosm. That contains all that is in the universe. There is a homology with the human body. Whatever is in the human body exists in the universe. Whatever exists in the universe exists in a miniature form in the human body. There is a homology and the indirect. So in other words, the human body is really a cosmic resonator. In some way it resonates with what is happening in the universe. This concept comes all the time. That is a dhatu in a particular component in the body, they will find an equivalent in the universe. Sometimes it's carried to absurd levels, but that concept was obsessive in Ayurveda. Macrocosm and microcosm. It has many implications in medicine, I will not go into all that. Similarly, Samya, another concept. Samya means equilibrium, a term which is very often used in Ayurveda. And what does this mean? A condition of well-being or health. They are not the same thing, but anyway, a condition of well-being, that is a state of equilibrium. And this equilibrium is not a unitary thing, it is a combination of many equilibria. For example, dhatus are there are 7 dhatus in the body according to Ayurveda, the bone, muscle, flesh, adipose tissue, etc. There are 7 of them. Now these must be in balance. That is not enough. Then there are doshas, very important. Doshas are a difficult thing to explain, but anyway, I'll try to explain that. There is a process of digestion in the body. All of us know if we eat food, it gets digested in the stomach. There is an Agni there which is digesting this. That everyone knows. Now when that digests, there is some part which becomes absorbed, assimilated into the body, and the rest of it is thrown away as execrables. That we all know. But Ayurveda insists that in every tissue, every dhatu, that is bone, flesh, adipose tissue, there also this digestion is taking place constantly. Now that digestion, there are Agnis there also. Just like in the stomach there is an Agni. There are Agnis in each of these. And when that digestion takes place, again 2 products are there. One is assimilable, which becomes part of the body. The other is eliminated. Now this eliminating, that execrable in these various components, Ayurveda insists they are also necessary for the body, but in a certain proportion. If it goes beyond that proportion, then it becomes dangerous. Otherwise they are important. Among these, in the products of digestion, execrables in the dhatus, these vata, pitta and kapha are the 3 components which are most important. And according to Ayurveda, they are necessary for our well-being in a certain proportion, certain quantity, and if that is exceeded, then it becomes dangerous. So there must be a samya, that is the term, dosha samya. Now it is something like, it's not fair to use these comparisons, but anyway, like our cholesterol you take. Many common people have the impression cholesterol is a highly toxic, dangerous thing. It should be eliminated. But that is not true. Cholesterol is a physiological thing, very necessary for the body. The body produces it, but only in a certain proportion. If you exceed that proportion, it does a lot of harm. So similarly, these doshas are also like that. In that proportion, they are dhatus. They are actually called maladhatus. That means they are necessary for the body. But when they exceed that, due to some various reasons, then it becomes dosha vaishamya. It is a disequilibrium. So there should be a samya there of the doshas. And that is not enough. Agnis, which I said in the stomach, all these dhatus, they must be in balance. There must be agni samya. And then the ritu samya. When the seasons change, especially these who are written in North India, in the month of May, for example, it is extremely hot in North India, or in January is extremely cold. When this happens, the body has to adjust. Sometimes we have to help in that adjustment by putting on woolen clothes. So that balance the body and the environment, that is Ritu Samya, there should be. And then there is Hetu Samya. This is something which will require some explanation. I will talk about it later. Hetu means a cause. So the causes of diseases, there are many, many causes. And many of these exist all around us in the environment. And many of them exist within the body. We cannot eliminate all of them. Sanitize the environment, sanitize the body. That's not possible. But even though they exist within the body, we are not all sick. If you examine a throat swab and all of us sitting here, all kinds of organisms can be grown. But they don't produce any disease. So there is a certain samya here between the causes existing in the body and the body itself. Now that samya is important. So therefore, a series of samyas, that is what produces this samya, which is well-being or good health. Now another took a subject like destiny. In the textbook of medicine, there is no need for all of this. But this is an important subject because is the lifespan predetermined? It's a very important question. A patient coming to the doctor even today, his real concern is not what is the diagnosis. His concern is what will happen to me. That is the main question. Will I live? Will something happen to me? This is the question. So therefore, destiny is something which a physician has to think about. Now there, if the lifespan is predetermined, then Charaka himself says, then what is the point of Ayurvedic treatment? What is the point of offering prayers to God? If span is predetermined, then leave it at that. There is no need for any effort. So that lifespan, the predetermination, or destiny, fate, all this. There is a traditional belief in India that is the ultimate. There is nothing anybody can do. Fate has decided everything. That is the fatalistic view. But very few people know that in India there was an opposite view also, called Paurushaya. And that view, especially championed in the Yoga Vasishta, that is human will can overcome this. That is the other extreme. In fact, there is not from Yoga Vasishta, a poet writing about the Yoga Vasishta, Paurushaya. That's a very beautiful verse. Udyoginam Purusha Simhamupayati Lakshmi. Devena Deyamati Kapurusha Vadanti. Devam Nihatya Kuru Paurusham Atma Shaktya. Yatne Krite Idina Siddhide Kotra Dosha. That poet says, fate, destiny favors the industrious. Those who say it is destiny, it is fate, these are the faint-hearted people. Kapurusha, they are cowards. Always saying fate will do everything. Why not defy fate? Devam Nihatya. Why don't you defy fate? Put your whole will into your effort. If at the end of it, you don't get the result, what difference does it make? It's a very defiant statement. We had that view also in India. But Charaka takes an intermediate view. Very often he liked the Buddhist influence, the middle path. He had a tendency to tread that. And there he says, it is true, the actions done in the past, that fate, that will be there. That has a certain force. Suppose evil things done in the past, there is a negative force, it will be there. You cannot push it away. But the right things you do today, a large part of Charaka Samhita is the right conduct. Now the right conduct, if you do, rigidly adhere to the righteous path, that has a positive force also. So Charaka says, if you do this, the righteous living, the positive forces you generate can neutralize the negative force from the past, maybe even overcome it. So there is a balance here. There is hope, the positivity of effort. So you put in righteous living. Then many of this can be overcome. That is the message Charaka gives. Neither of these extremes. Now then there is another Prajnaparatha, among the causes of diseases. Major cause is Prajnaparatha. Prajnaparatha, the term which means is erroneous conduct. To give an example, there is an error in judgment, imprudent action, all this comes when we know, everybody knows that smoking, it leads to plenty of evidence, it leads to lung cancer, it leads to coronary artery disease, all these are known. But people still smoke. Excessive liquor intake produces cirrhosis of the liver, all kinds of illnesses. It is well known, but there is so much of alcoholism, including in my own state of Kerala. Highly educated people, but alcoholism is very high. Number of examples like this, what we call lifestyle diseases today, many of them are due to this. It is all in our control, but people still do it. This is Prajnaparatha. Partly it is the helplessness of the human condition. In the Mahabharata, Dhritarashtra, the blind king, his wicked sons were doing all kinds of evil things. He knew what they were doing, but he couldn't stop them or he wouldn't stop them. And in one place he admits, he says to his half-brother Vidura, Janami dharmam nachame pravritti. I know what I should do, but I cannot do it. Janami adharmam nachame nivritti. I know what I should not do, but I cannot help doing it. Now that's a helplessness. These people who keep smoking, they know that this is going to hurt me very badly. It will hurt my family, but I cannot help it. Now unless, then this cannot be treated by medicines and so on. It has to have a very different approach. So Prajnaparatha is another, it goes into, I'm only sort of giving some hints here and there. That discussed in great detail. That's a big subject in the background. Then habitat, the place we live, our planet, the earth we live in. And this is vulnerable to epidemics, floods, droughts, environmental disasters, large-scale destruction. Ultimately, according to Charaka, just like human Prajnaparatha we talked about, diseases and suffering of individuals traceable to their own conduct. Similarly, epidemics and devastation of the environment, that is also traceable to unrighteous conduct of the rulers and the ruled. And he gives examples of that. I'll give you an example. In the 19th century, it's not easy to detect this when you say epidemics are caused by unrighteous conduct. It doesn't make any sense. But the example is, in Manchuria, China, in 19th century there was a pneumonic plague and more than 1 billion people died. Obviously the plague is Yersinia pestis, that organism is known. That is the cause of death, immediate cause of death. We can say Yersinia pestis killed all these people. You would be correct. But is that really correct? Is that the whole truth? Because what happened in that place, there was a particular type of rodent in Manchuria. The wool of that rodent was very popular in Europe, very high quality, like our pashmina shawl-like kind of thing. They could make shawls, they could make coats. So in Europe, this was very popular. So at that time, the European colonizers coming to Asia. They were making a lot of money in 19th century. Europe was awash with money, with wealth. And the women, they wanted all these fashionable things. The shawls, coats. Very high demand for this wool. Now what happened was the traders who wanted this, they came to China in large numbers. The Chinese, they had their own rules, conventions about collecting, harvesting the wool. Very young animals, very old animals, sick-looking animals. Certain times of the year you should not collect. These were all their age-old beliefs, practices. But all these were thrown to the winds because they wanted the wool at any cost. So they started collecting indiscriminately. Mostly the Chinese workers were collecting. And this was taken to Europe. Then what happened was the Chinese who were collecting this, one of them got suddenly fever, he started coughing out blood. That was pneumonic plague. And it spread like wildfire. Nobody knew what was happening. Spread all over Manchuria, and more than 1 million people died. What happened was some of these old or quiet-looking, these rodents, they were harboring this pus, the Yersinia pestis, what are called carriers. There is a condition called carriers. A carrier can carry typhoid organism within himself or herself without being sick. They have developed a samya with that, very highly dangerous organism. Now that, by doing this indiscriminate harvesting, they had activated this. It would come out, they would inhale during this collection of wool. And they would get, suddenly in this, the man who was doing this was not a carrier. He was a healthy person. But he inhales this dust with Yersinia pestis, and he would develop this pneumonic plague. And 100% mortality, and it spread. Now here if you look at it, this epidemic which killed more than 1 million people, is it correct to say that Yersinia pestis is the cause of death? It is the cause. But there are so many other contributory causes without which this would not have happened. The greed of the traders, the women who wanted fashion at any cost, all this. So the human conduct, that is very much at the root of all this. This is an example of environmental devastation leading to unrighteous conduct on the part of very many people. Now this is a painting of Charaka. We don't know much about Charaka, except there are even scholars who question whether Charaka was the name. He was a member of a tribe of wandering physicians. Charati means moving. There was wandering physicians in those days. There was a tribe and he was a member of that. But anyway, there is a consensus among scholars that he lived in the 1st century. He was a contemporary of Kanishka. There is some agreement on that. So this is a painting by Roerich, who was a great Russian painter who made India his home. He was very fond of Himalayas. A number of his paintings are about Himalayas. And this is a painting of Charaka. He is coming down the slopes of Himalayan hills collecting medicinal plants. Now all his paintings, a great many of them, he donated to Banaras Hindu University. And this painting I found in the Kalabhavan Museum. I was fortunate enough to get a copy from the university. And this is a painting of Charaka, what he might have looked like. Now the major part of Ayurveda, as I mentioned, is Swastavrita, or health care. How to remain out of trouble. Now that a code for daily life, look at the details. Introspection and waking up. It is not that the everyday prayer is mentioned, but very great importance is given to introspection. Days and nights pass, and you must ask yourself, what have you done with yourself? It's an extraordinary thing. You must ask yourself, what have you done with your life? That question, if you ask, these are very beautiful verses, I won't quote all that here, but this is one of the things which is every day that introspection should be a habit of yours. If you do that, you will not come to grief. This is exactly what that verse says. Oral care. evacuation, oil massage, bath, wearing adornments. This was encouraged. Ayurveda incidentally had a very cheerful attitude to life. In other words, you should have ornaments, you should wear flowers. These are all encouraged Ayurveda. You should enjoy comfortable clothes, physical activity and worship. Worship is one of these. No special, no temple, no rituals, nothing. Personal conduct, care of feet, haircut, all these are described. Paring nails every 15 days, all that is mentioned. Use of a cloak, umbrella, walking stick, comfortable furniture, guidelines on conversation, guidelines on social behavior, covering mouths during cough, not urinating in public places, all these are emphasized. Living in harmony with seasons, Rutucharya, adjustments in food, physical and sexual activity, clothes, sleep, to suit 2 halves of the year. There were 6 seasons in India, in North India. It was divided into 2 halves. One half was the summer, the hot season, when the sun takes away all the moisture and energy from the earth. And the second half when all this comes back. So these 2 halves, it was believed by them that the chemical composition in the body also will change. So therefore, your food, your conduct, your behavior, all this must be adjusted to these 2. It cannot be the same. So the dry and wet halves of the year, and the rasa was a term used, rasa in those days, chemistry. We call it rasa shastra today, or rasa tantra. That came from that. Rasa is the Ayurvedic or Sanskrit term for chemistry. So that the rasa changes within the body. So you have to adjust your conduct, your food, everything to suit these 2 halves of the year. Then life beyond bread. This is truthfulness, forgiveness, compassion, equanimity, dedicated work with indifference to results, seeing oneself in all living things, repeatedly emphasized, liberality in views. In Ayurveda, these big texts, everywhere, you may do this, you may do this. That's how it is mentioned. There is only one place where that commanding imperative is used. You shall do this, only in one place. That is when the teacher is administering an oath to students about his conduct. There, you shall do this, you shall. That's the only place. Everywhere else it is very liberal. You may do it like this. Even the code of conduct, when you have the long description, he says, there may be people who live in other places observing a different code of conduct and they may be blessed with well-being. That may also be done. So it is a very liberal views. And a cheerful, confident attitude, which celebrated life. All this is repetitive. There is an Indian stereotype, we are very pessimistic, fatalistic, otherworldly, world-renouncing. That is how Indians are, which is completely wrong. If you read Ayurveda, you get a totally different impression about Indians. They were cheerful, they were energetic, eating, sexual activity, all these, not just for biological needs alone. You should enjoy. That's the attitude in Ayurveda. And no gloom, no denigration of the human body. Vedantic literature or Buddhist literature, there is a lot of denigration of the body. Body is all the seat of worms, germs, etc., etc. It is perishing. Denigration of the human body. You will not find this in Ayurveda. Ayurveda celebrates the life, health, body. Then food and drinks. All this comes in Swastavrata. Sustenance is foremost but enjoyment. Elaborate classification of foods and drinks. Extensive knowledge of the cultivation of grains, plants, fruits, characteristic of meats. When the grain should be collected. How it should be collected. Can it be used fresh? Some they would say it should be used after a year. All very great, highly specific. Similarly, meats. Even the meat, which part of the animal is better. Even to that extent. And the process of cooking. And the role of food in nutrition and therapeutics. Because there was not much difference between food and drugs in Ayurveda. In fact, in Manipal recently there was an Indo-Australian seminar and the title was Food as Medicine. That was the title of the seminar. There is a whole lot of that in Ayurveda because Ayurvedic treatment is impossible without pathya. Pathya is food regimen. And culinary arts and etiquette of dining. like how the food should be served, how the table should be arranged, how the vessels to be served, how the wine should be served, in what kind of vessels. So there is the order in which food should be served. Everything is there. So there is an etiquette for dining. Now this is a classification which is from Sushruta: cereals, meats, fruits, greens and vegetables, tubers, salts, prepared foods, krathanas, sweet edibles, postprandial drinks. The kind of drinks that you take, buttermilk or water, coconut water, etc. These should be governed by the nature of the food that you have eaten. If you have eaten a non-vegetarian meal consisting of certain meats, then there is an appropriate postprandial drink. That is what you should take. And each of these, there are subgroups. This is one of the longest chapters. Ayurvedic students tell me that this is one of the most tedious things for them. Charaka has the longest chapter is on this. And classification, sub-classification goes into all that. Now these are some of the examples. I have taken these from, there is a book called Bhojana Kutuhala, published in the 18th century. These are all taken from that. Cereals, and here are the animals mentioned. Meats, various types of birds commonly mentioned, the meats are used. Now the aquatic animals, very different types of fish, and also the vessels used for boiling, for preparing these. That is also described, what kind of vessels you should use. Incidentally, some of the casual references, which are of great interest, because when they talk about fish, there is a mention, since you have oceanography here, I should mention this. Riverine fish and sea fish, both are described. But in one place it says, the shape of this fish is determined by the nature of the flow of water. That is a very important statement. There's only one line. But on growth and form, D.R.C. Thompson, more than 100 years ago, a very great biologist, he wrote a book, Nothing the Shape of the Elephant or the Ant or the Human Being. These are not accidental things. That form of this, the biological form, it is determined by the function. So that there is a particular reason why they are like this, why a tree is like this, why a leaf like this. These are not accidental things at all. They are all determined by function. Over millions of years, that's how it evolves. A function determining form. Now this is an example, a fish in a river, for example, or in an ocean. To what extent function plays a role in determining that form? It is a very interesting scientific question, but you will find a single line there mentioning that. Ayurvedic medicine, patient care, we now come to the treatment of sick people. Ayurveda had an eightfold division. Surgery comes first, Shalya, head and neck diseases, Shalakya, general medicine, Kaya Chikitsa, children's diseases, Kaumara Mritya, then possession by evil spirits, Bhuta Vidya. Many of them look like psychiatric illnesses, poisoning, like snake bites, various types of insect bites, rejuvenation in aging, Rasayana, and enhancement of sexual potency and fertility, that is Vajikarana. These are the branches of Ayurveda. Now, when you look at diseases, I did a little bit of experiment. I thought I should mention that here, which I call archaeo-epidemiology. This is my own, it's not from Charaka. That is there some way of knowing in Charaka's India 2000 years ago, what were the kind of illnesses they had in India, in northwest India? Did they have the same pattern, tuberculosis, typhoid fever and so on? Or was it a totally different type of epidemiology they had? Now you will not find, like now we will say out of 1,000, 10 children have rheumatic heart disease. That kind of statement, epidemiologic statements. That started only in the late 19th century. Otherwise nobody did this kind of research. Statistics didn't exist. But is there some way you can get an idea? And one way I thought it could be done, if you take a general textbook of medicine, like what we learned in, say, 60 years ago when I was a medical student, there is a textbook of medicine called Davidson, standard textbook, all diseases are mentioned. Now there, typhoid fever in those days, there will be 4 pages on that. Coronary artery disease will be 2 or 3 pages. There will be nothing mentioned about HIV/AIDS. But today, if you look at the same textbook, the edition, 40th edition or whatever. Here, today you will find typhoid fever maybe only 2-3 paragraphs. There will be 10 pages on coronary artery disease. There will be 7 or 8 pages on HIV/AIDS. So the number of references in a standard text, that is a reflection of the disease load in the community, how common it is. Because this is meant to enable the doctors, to treat those patients, so they have got to know everything about it. Now this, when you look at Charaka Samhita, it was a general text, all diseases are treated or mentioned. All are not treated the same way. Some diseases, it goes on and on, maybe 20 pages. Others maybe only 2 pages. Now this logic applies even in those days. So therefore, if you take the diseases and you can count the number of times it is referred to, that is a rough reflection, a reliable reflection according to me, of the disease load at that time. Now using this, I have a friend, Professor Yamashita in Kyoto University, a great Ayurvedic scholar. He has actually done his PhD on one chapter from Charaka Samhita. He had done a digitization of this text of Charaka. So a digitized text, you can count the number of references to a particular disease or a particular drug, whatever you want. So when you I did this counting, there is when you look at diseases, there are 2 groups, infectious diseases, non-infectious diseases. Everyone knows that now. Infectious is tuberculosis, malaria, etc. Non-infectious is cancer, heart disease, and so on. Now it is well known that the early stage of a society's development, like India, pre-independence India, the life expectancy was only 36. When I joined the medical college in 1951, life expectancy in India was 36 or 37. And today the life expectancy is 70 plus. So there is a huge change. Now when the life expectancy is very low, like 36, that is partly because the infectious diseases are very high. Typhoid fever. In those days, I myself used to see, we had no treatment for typhoid. So in Trivandrum General Hospital, where we used to go, we had a whole ward called fever ward. Most of them were typhoid patients. And mortality on the average was 20-25%. Very high. There was no treatment. No, chloromazidine had not come. So a lot of patients die. So life expectancy is low. But as general health improves, nutrition, sanitation, new treatments come, all this will change. So over a period of time, when these infectious diseases largely disappear, today patients are not even admitted. Medical students go through their entire course without seeing typhoid fever today, or pneumonia. They don't see that now. So infectious diseases have largely disappeared, or they are non-fatal, and non-infectious diseases come. Cancer comes, coronary artery disease, which we hardly saw in those days. So therefore, that transition is called epidemiologic transition. So I took 9 infectious diseases, 9 non-infectious diseases, and I did the counting of this, how many times Charaka refers. When I did this exercise, there were 890 references to infectious diseases and only 580 for non-infectious. It's statistically significant. So obviously, infectious diseases were much more common in Charaka's time, which is what we would expect. And diagnosis was done very elaborate. In fact, Professor Kutumbaya, who was a distinguished professor of medicine and Vellore, who took interest in Ayurveda, and he says the Charaka's description of diagnosis is much more elaborate than in any other system, including Hippocratic medicine. There were 3 stages of diagnosis. One is a preliminary assessment. That's the first. That is preliminary in the sense physician is asking, am I competent to treat this patient? Today, nobody will ask that question, but the physician has to ask, am I qualified? Do I have the experience to treat this? Do I have the facilities to treat this? Availability of medicine, availability of help, etc. Do I have all that to treat this? Such questions. And the purpose of treatment, is it curable? Is it curable with difficulty or incurable? All these must be, that a preliminary assessment has to be made. The season, if it is very hot season, treatment would be different compared to very cold season. All these general determinations must be made, even the residence of the patient. In fact, it goes into such detail, the place where he is living may not be the place where he was born. The place where he is living, what sort of plants grows there, what kind of food people eat there, what kind of illnesses they have. They go into all these details. So therefore, these are exceedingly important. Today we realize the importance of all this, an endemic disease and all that. You have to spend time. Today doctors, we have no time. We spend hardly any time. We get the lab reports, we treat. But in those days, that preliminary assessment consists of all this, collecting general information, background. The second is body features. That is dosha prakriti, the constitutional type of the person. Mainly this is based on questioning again. Dosha equilibrium, the samya which I mentioned, measurement of body parts, mental status. You see a very cowardly person, somebody who faints on the sight of blood, or the very mention of something he faints. There are some who are very tough. That mental status is very important. Some are highly apprehensive. They don't trust the patient. They don't trust the physician. They don't trust anybody. Or they don't trust the treatment. Now, if that kind of a mental attitude is very important to assess, because the results will not be very good of treatment. And digestive power. Suppose somebody who is a dyspeptic, who tolerates every food disagrees with him. That sort of thing. Exercise tolerance, how much can he walk? Can he run? All that. These are all, again, little less general than the first category. And the third category is the clinical diagnosis, what we do now. Examining the patient, using our senses. In those days, they had no stethoscope. They would directly listen to the sound of the bowels. There is no mention of heart sounds, incidentally. There is something about breathing sounds. If he is having breathing difficulty, they would notice. So a physician would use all his senses, except taste. And the taste was used indirectly. If a patient with diabetes, the urine, ants do they collect where you pass urine? Such questions will be asked indirectly. Otherwise, that's the third phase of diagnosis. In fact, the importance of diagnosis is well recognized. Charaka says, a physician who fails to enter the dark interior of the body with the lamp of knowledge and discrimination, jnana buddhi pradipena. With those two, that is intelligence and discrimination, those lamps, a physician who fails to enter the interior of the body with these and search, he is incapable of treating the patient. That is a picturesque way of putting it. And the disease, it was not in the sense that we have ICD classification of disease. Diagnosis was the disturbance of doshas. What is the particular dosha disequilibrium in this person? And also at what stage it is. There are 5 stages. A disease, a prodromal stage, when a patient feels, I'm not feeling too good today. You don't know what is wrong. Even now we have that. A patient comes and says, for the last 2 days I'm not feeling good. He doesn't know what is wrong, but he knows he is not well. Physician cannot detect anything. Test may be negative. So what we do now is keep him under observation. If he is a family with educated relatives and all that, we may allow that to be done at home. Otherwise we'll keep him in the hospital and see what is happening. So in those days, starting from that, then it comes to the full-blown stage of the disease. So there are 5 stages they recognized. It is important in diagnosis to recognize what stage he is in that disease. And then the treatment, for small illnesses there is a shamana. In fact, that Chinese pilgrim who came, Yun Sang, and he writes there, the Indians, when they get sick, they don't consult a physician. The first 5 days, they just fast this person. And with that, most of them get well. When he doesn't get well, then they consult a physician. This is what he writes there. So shamana is for mild problems, fasting, rest, simple medications. This is all that is done. And very many of these were done at home. They never went to a doctor. That's what the Chinese pilgrim writes. So this is important because we have come to a stage now because people have no longer any autonomy. Everybody is worried all the time. If I sneeze 3-4 times, if I cough a few times, I have some headache, we must immediately consult a physician. And physician will not treat without investigations. He has to have a series of investigations. So with the result, this has become so very, partly the video also contributed to this. And every system is doing this. With the result, we have become a highly medicated community, living medicated lives. What we should eat, we should ask the doctor, can I eat this? Can I drink this? So we have lost our autonomy completely, which has its own consequences because our medical bills are astronomical. No society can survive with that kind. So here the shamana is largely done at home. Shodhana, if the disease doesn't improve or the symptoms are very strong, violent, then shodhana. And in Ayurveda, the doshas are perturbed, excess quantity, those 5 stages, that is what happened. By the 3rd stage, the doshas are proliferated, the quantity is very high, and you have to eliminate them. They become toxic. They have crossed that limit. And that is done by a series of procedures, including panchakarma, various medications are given. That is the medical treatment. And in fact, Charaka even talks about a place for treatment. If these procedures are required, it cannot be done at home, it cannot be done in the patient, in the physician's house. So a place for treatment, how it should be built, the kind of locale where it should be, what kind of a building it should be, and there should be trees all around, there should be bodies of water, cattle roaming around, bird song, flowers, patient's room, there should be flowers, there should be a room for the physician, there should be room for attendants, there should be room for balladeers who can tell stories to the patient. There should be a musician's room where the musicians can sing there. So like that, there is a very good description of a place for healing. It is not a hospital. So that kind of a place is necessary if you have to do complicated treatment. Now this shamana is underestimated. That's the point I made. It's a very important thing. We have to somehow recover some of that spirit of some of our own autonomy on ourselves. Now, if during the training, there are some who are interested in the Dhanvantari tradition of surgery. In those days it existed. Sushruta's book is all about it. Now they had special type of training. Not everybody. Those who have surgical orientation, interest, they would be treated. These are the basic procedures of surgery, like excision. It is being shown, bhedya, incision, and notice the instruments there. Then here, probing, if there is a foreign body inside, or a sinus, or a fistula which has got a tortuous course, how to probe it. And there is an instrument for that. And if there is a foreign body inside, how to take it out, aharya, that is another procedure. Now these are all basic procedures. These are models which Sushruta describes. And this is one of the earliest examples of using simulation in training. He describes all these 6 procedures, including stitching and so on. I think we've got a problem here. So the experimental surgery for teaching Thank you. Okay. So those procedures are all taught to students in these models. So simulation was used very effectively in the training surgical students. Now this is among the number of surgical operations described by Sushruta, very large number. I have taken one which received the greatest publicity, plastic reconstruction of the nose. There is a history behind this. Sushruta describes this. Now, Sushruta's description is very brief but very clear. Now here is an example. The nose was cut off, which was a punishment in those days, and how it was reconstructed by taking a flap from the cheek. This is what Sushruta described, and how that is reattached and 2 tubes are inserted to keep the nostrils open. This was Sushruta's description. But even though Sushruta Samhita describes this, he also describes repair of the ear in greater detail, because ear piercing was very commonly done, and very often they would get infected. And with infection, that pinna where the hole is made, that would get destroyed, and there would be ugly deformity there. So they would take a flap from the cheek and reconstruct it. It's a very great detailed description. Now, by the time, say, 4th or 5th century, Sushruta was a near contemporary of the Buddha. That was the time when surgeons were highly respected. You saw Shalya is listed as the #1 in the branches of Ayurveda. Highly respected physicians who were Dhanvantari tradition, who were operating. Surgical instrument makers were highly respected, Karma Kovidas. That was at the time. By 4th or 5th century of the current era, this had changed because surgeons became lower caste all of a sudden. People who make instruments, who weave, anybody using their hand, farmers, blacksmiths, they all lost their high position in society. They became lower caste. This is something which is a very important subject sociologically, and it became so bad with the result the man doing this craft, including plastic surgery. He had no education. He couldn't go to any school. He was not permitted. He could only be doing his trade. In this case, in Maharashtra, potters were doing this. Only potters would do his operation. In fact, the potter's name, I cannot remember the exact Maharashtrian name, which the English had, English term they have distorted somewhat. I'll say that, how I come to that. All these procedures, for example, fracture setting, Sushruta has a very detailed description of fractures, classification, how they should be set. These were not done by Ayurvedic physicians at all. They were being done by bone setters, who are lower caste. Sushruta described couching for cataract. Now, couching for cataract, no Ayurvedic physician would do it. It was being done in Tamil Nadu. We have eyewitness descriptions. It was being done by a low caste person and Mohammedans. Only they would do this, couching for cataract. So therefore, there is a dissociation between the head and the hand. The people doing this, they only use their hands with great skill because they were repeatedly doing it. But there was no, every time you ask him, why are you doing it like this? That I don't know. My father taught me this. This would be the answer. And this is not only here. Indians making steel. Many of you would have heard about root steel, the famous rustless Ashoka pillar and so on, from Mauryan times. So that was a very great, extraordinarily skillful, the whole world admired the way Indians making steel. Now when the British came here, the East India Company, in the 18th, 19th centuries, they wanted to know how the Indians were making steel. So they sent one James Franklin, who was a fellow of the Royal Society. He was sent to Jabalpur area to find out how the Indians were making this steel. So he has a very detailed description. A metallurgist will understand it better than I do. He went and looked at the ore, how they break it, the size of those fragments they were breaking, how they build a smelter. There was no coal, only charcoal was used. How they would have a layer of ore, a layer of charcoal like that they would have, and it would be lit. And within 3 hours, the scoria would pour out. Everything is described. And the man with the billows, he would be blowing it all the time. And then this, once it drops, the iron, it is put in a refinery. There is another refinery which is built, all including diagrams. But the interesting thing is, when he asked this man making this, it looks crude outside. But inside, the dimensions are always constant. So he would ask him, why is it the billows are attached like this? Why cannot it? No, that my father has taught me like this. Every time he would get this reply. Then he writes there, it is clear to me that the original designer, he must have been of superior intelligence. Something like that he writes there. Now the same thing you find here also. This particular operation was done in Pune. We would never have known this until in Bombay, which is very close, so I think it is of some interest, you should know this. There was an English doctor, Scott, of East India Company, who really took interest in the medical practice of natives. Most of them ignored it completely, but he took interest. So one day, a Captain Irvine in Bombay, he told Dr. Scott, you know, there is something funny here. I had a sepoy, an Indian, whose nose had been cut off by Tipu. He came to me asking for leave for 2 weeks. He wanted to go to Pune to have his nose fixed. This is ridiculous. It's not done. There is no such thing in Pune. He's telling a lie. So this Scott took interest. He said, no, is it, why don't you ask whether there is anybody else who had this done? So this sepoy brought another man whose nose had been repaired. And it looked to be a good nose. So this captain said, okay, I'll give 2 weeks leave. But Dr. Scott wrote to there was a British ambassador with the Peshwa in Pune. So he wrote to him, I'm sending this patient there. When it is getting fixed, you please have it observed by a surgeon and send me a report. So 2 British surgeons watched this operation being done in Pune. And that is available with figures, very detailed report, completely trustworthy. Here this man who came to Pune, he writes there, Kumar caste, that is the name. C-O-O-M-A-R, Kumar caste, this is what they call it. My friends in Maharashtra, they told me it is actually potters. So anyway, this patient goes there, this man is sitting under a tree, he has a razor, he takes a leaf from that tree and puts it on his nose and cuts a template of that shape and size, puts it on the forehead of this patient and cuts a flap, not from the cheek, from the forehead. And then he freshens the edges of this defect, places this flap and fixes it with a vegetable glue, no stitches. And then cotton soaked in ghee is put as a dressing. And 2 tubes are kept there to keep the nostrils open like this. And then he is told for 5 days, every day he has to drop ghee on this, etc. Instructions are given. At the end of 5 days, this surgeon's right, it has taken a good adhesion, that means it is healing. All these descriptions are there. Now this report was published in a Gentleman's Magazine in London, and that was published in the early 19th century, 1810 or something like that. And that was seen by a British surgeon called Carco, who was a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, and he did this operation there. And he waited for 5 years to see whether the repaired nose would take, whether it is very careful follow-up. And then he wrote a block paper. That's the first time the Western world became aware of this operation. So in India, it was a great tragedy. All these great procedures developed here, done here, instruments designed here, we lost all that because by the foolish act of neglecting this whole class of people who are doing this work and ignore the kind of disconnect between the brain and the hand. That is the real crime. And P.C. Ray, in his famous History of Chemistry, he writes there, by doing this, not only here, steel making, surgery, everywhere we did this. With the result, India's soil became morally unfit for the birth of a Boyle or a Newton. And her name was all but expunged from the history of natural sciences. This is what P.C. Ray writes. And that is the price we paid. We continue to pay that. Now these are some of the instruments that Charaka described and Sushrata described, 100 blunt instruments called which are much more often used, and 20 sharp instruments, yantras and shastras. These are forceps of different kind. These are also these are the sharp instruments, shastras, examples, scissors. There are all these are available information. Then the training to be a physician, very important. It was an obligation to train young physicians. It was a solemn ceremony in the front of a sacrificial fire, an academic assembly there, and that is where the teacher would give this series of admonitions and the student has to say, I do. And if you read, there is a long oath, far more elaborate than our Hippocratic oath. It covers the entire physician's life, personal life, social life, professional conduct, spiritual conduct, every aspect of life is covered for the whole life, not just doing medical treatment. And this is just a quote from that. You should give up lust, anger, avarice, folly, vanity, pride, envy, rudeness, etc. You should always have your hair and nails cut short, should put on red colored cloth, lead a pure life, avoid sexual intercourse and be ready to obey your superiors. It goes on like that, very detailed. I won't read all this, you can glance through it, but see how very thorough it is. And many of them are still of great contemporary value. But the important thing is, this oath was taken at the commencement of training. Whereas Hippocratic oaths, now we take it at the conclusion of training, when we get our degree. So here it is at the beginning. Now I mentioned this, and St. John's, I was very pleased to hear, in St. John's Hospital, Bangalore, they have a medical ethics department, one of the pioneering institutions to start that. They have taken note of this. And what they do is, Hippocratic oath is still there. But at the beginning, they have something like this they have introduced. Because it is important during those 4 or 5 years of training, that is the time a physician is really being shaped, his whole thinking. This is the time it should be done, not when you have finished your training. So they have introduced something similar to this. They have used this to develop that. Now I come to the second part, which is a briefer. There is scientific research in Ayurveda, modern science coming into contact with Ayurveda. Now here this is of some interest to you in Goa especially. And it is something like different sciences we have pharmacology, we have biology, chemistry, physics. All these have tried to look at Ayurveda in their own way. It is like in a mine, people go to mine various things there based on their interests. It is something like that. They get what they want. Now here, the beginning of this, the first time the encounter of Western science or Western medicine with Ayurveda was in Goa. That was a remarkable person, Garcia de Horta, who was from Portugal. He became a physician there, and then he traveled with the commander of the fleet, who was his friend, and came to Goa in the 16th century. And he lived in Goa for 36 years, practicing medicine. And he wrote a book, The Colloquies on the Simples and Drugs of India. It became a great classic. He wrote it in Latin. It was in the form of a colloquy, a dialogue between himself and an interlocutor called Ruano, who was a mythical figure. But in those days it was fashionable to write in a dialogue form. It makes it much more interesting, rather than reading a long text. Even today, in a dialogue form, it is more interesting. So this is a dialogue. Now there are, in these 54, each one of them is about a plant. There are also some about other things, but mostly each one comes about a particular plant, how it is used, what kind of disease it is used for, how it is harvested, a whole lot of information. Also about geography, something about the illness. It's a very, very interesting book. And also, because he lived here for so many years, in Europe at that time it was the Inquisition time. You had to literally follow what was written by Galen's medicine. You could not deviate from that. Whereas in India, our native practices were there. Some Arabic practices had come. So Garcia had a liberal mind. He would accept some of them. So you will find here that Ruano, his interlocutor, he would keep on objecting. You cannot do this because it is against Galen's medicine. And he would argue in favor of this. And in one place he writes, I could not have written this book in Europe. So Goa had liberalized him in some ways. It's an interesting book. And that book was translated immediately into many European languages because European countries like France, Holland, they were all trying to come to Asia because Asia had wealth, colonization, that was the time. So they all took interest because the problem in Goa was, in a matter of 10 years, according to Dr. Garg's book, 400,000 population in Goa was reduced to 40,000 because of infectious diseases, cholera, epidemics. 10 viceroys and governors died here. So it was a terrible situation for them, and they could not get enough Portuguese physicians to come here. So they had an acute crisis. They had a big hospital in Goa, which treated 3,000 patients a year. Apparently all these records are available in Goan archives. I was surprised to read this. This research was done by an American, Timothy Walker, and he has described all of this. It was managed by Jesuits, and so they had to accept native physicians to treat many of these diseases because they had not seen this. Cholera, for example, he describes. They did not know how to deal with it. So many of these Indian medicinal plants were used, not only from Ayurveda, from folk practice also they accepted. Whatever the local physicians were using, which was effective, they would take it. So there was a phase, even though officially only Portuguese medicine was legal, unofficially all this was done. In fact, even a viceroy was treated by the Ayurvedic physician. His name is also mentioned. So that there was a hybrid medicine here in practice at that time. So that was started here. But that interest in Indian medicinal plants, it grew very rapidly. And the next was Van Riel, another remarkable person, a Dutch governor of Kochi. He took interest in this subject after this Garcia's book. And he was a governor who knew nothing about Ayurveda, but he found that he writes there, the Kerala, that he was not impressed with the diet of Keralites. He thought it was very poor quality, but they were healthy. So he said, these people who are healthy here, that must be because they noticed they were taking small quantities of spices, pepper, cardamom, all sorts of things, turmeric. There is no food here without some of this. That must be the reason for their good health. So he started his interest, and finally there was a big survey, more than 100 people, herbalists, physicians, Ayurveda, there was a physician involved, large number of people doing a complete survey on the West Coast. And he produced over 30 years a remarkable book, Hortus Malabaricus, the Garden of Malabar. It's a wonderful book, more than 700 plants, the names in Sanskrit, in Latin, in Arabic and Malayalam. They are given there, exquisite diagrams, and what it is used for, all these are described. It was published from Amsterdam in 12 volumes. And after this, Roxborough, many others, by that time it spread to British India, the interest, large number of British scholars came, books came. So taxonomy, that was the window through which Western science was viewing Indian medicine. That continued for almost 300 years. And all these efforts, essentially, they were looking for a good medicinal preparation, a compound. As the chemistry became more refined, more powerful, instead of doing only the ground herbal extracts, can we find that compound from that? With the advances in chemistry, that was the next effort, always looking for a powerful remedy to treat a disease. And in the 21st century, as you know, the greatest advances, molecular biology, the double helix. So earlier on it was starting with taxonomy, and then it was organic chemistry or natural products chemistry. India did a great deal of work in the 20th century. Ramnath Chopra, many others, we don't have time to discuss all that. Ashima Chatterjee, Govindachari, great names. So in natural products chemistry, India became somewhat of a leader in the world. So 21st century, with these new developments, molecular biology and immunology especially, that also is a new window through which you can look Ayurveda. Now that is one of the things which currently goes on. We have the science initiative in Ayurveda, which was supported by the principal advisor to Government of India, Dr. Chidambaram. He took interest in this 2007. We started looking at Ayurveda through this window, the new window, that is modern biology. Now that we take only, the research projects we are not looking for a remedy to treat a disease. There is a basic difference here. Here is the basic science applied to Ayurvedic concepts, Ayurvedic procedures. That is what we are doing here. It's purely knowledge-oriented, not product-oriented. There is a very significant difference here. And Dr. Chidambaram has, or fortunately, he had what he called directed basic research. Under that, this could fit in, because there is a national perspective here. Otherwise, it is a science as rigorous as any other science. Now, I just want to give one example of this research, which funded and published. There are several others, I won't go into that. Rasayana, as I mentioned, is one of the 8 branches of Ayurveda. Essentially, Rasayana is how to, aging is inevitable, everybody will age. But aging need not be associated irrevocably with infirmities. We always associate aging with infirmities, arthritis, cataract, wrinkling of skin, falling of hair, all sort of tiredness, number of things. So that, there is no need for that. Aging without tears, if I could just say that. That was the aim of Rasayana. So again, it shows the Indians, their wish to live well, healthy, 100 years maybe live. That was the very positive. So Rasayana is an indication of that, but then how do you find a biological evidence for it? It's not enough you give Rasayana and a person says, I'm feeling very good. That's not evidence. So you have to produce evidence. Today, it could not be done 50 years ago when molecular biology didn't exist. But today, we have the means to do it. So this is a project on that. And here, Amalaki Rasayana, which is commonly used, Charaka describes it, even now it is used extensively. And this was prepared according to the ancient protocol by Aryavaidashala in Kottakkal, which is a highly respected, more than 100 years old. They prepare these exactly as per the original description. And they prepared this, and it was tested in 2 models. One was in rats, done by Professor Kalluri Subbarao in Hyderabad. He has been working for some 20, 30 years on DNA chain breaks. That is his special area, that stability of DNA. So DNA chain breaks take place in everybody. As age advances, the rate of repair comes down. So part of the reason for our senescence is because of this. Not solely because of this. But that is, he had developed a series of test ways of measuring this DNA chain breaks, which he had published extensively. So what he did was, Amalaki Rasayana was given to the rats. And he measured the DNA chain breaks. The control rats and the rats receiving this Rasayana at 3 months, 9 months, 15 months. That's the standard way of doing. Both in the neurons and astrocytes in the brain. That was the study, and which is published by Subbarao. And the other, this was given to Drosophila by Professor Lakhotia in Banaras University, and looking at a series of biomarkers in Drosophila. Now both this is the publication of Lakhotia. DNA damage expressed as chain breaks, neurons and astrocytes is much less in the Amalaki Rasayana fed rats. This is Subbarao's, published in Mechanism of Aging and Development, a very important journal. And the genomic stability is therefore significantly improved by Amalaki Rasayana feeding. That is the conclusion of that paper. When you look at the given to Drosophila, you will find all these: earlier pupation, earlier adult eclosion, increase in the size of salivary glands, increase in hatched eggs in female flies fed on Amalaki Rasayana, increased fecundity, increase in the median lifespan, increase in tolerance of thermal stress and starvation. This is published in PLOS 1. So both these have just taken 2 examples to show that a concept which existed at that time, it was being given extensively. Even today, I understand among the Ayurvedic formulations in the market, these Rasayanas are the largest selling, most popular. But this is an evidence which nobody can refute in biological terms. That is the kind of research which currently goes on. So in this, what we call Ayurvedic biology, it is a new term. These are new sprouts coming in a very ancient tree. And slowly this will build up. One paper like this, for example, Subbarao's paper was seen by a scientist, and that scientist has put up a project. He says, look, you are looking at the DNA chain breaks only, but there is a whole lot else happening in the brain in terms of chemistry. He has got a mouse model, Alzheimer's, he does MRI spectroscopy, that is his specialty. Now he wants to give it and see what happens to the metabolism in the brain. Now therefore, each paper will stimulate interest in 3-4 others, and they will look at it differently. That is how it is ramified. What you see sprouts here and there, very soon you will find the whole tree full of bloom. I hope that will happen, and that is the current state of research. I would stop at this. I have not gone into the practice of medicine deliberately because there is no end to that. We can go on and on. I will stop with this, the interaction of traditional medicine and modern science, including medical science. Thank you very much.